Hey,
Hey.
let's okay, enough of pitch clock. Let's talk a little bit. So you brought something up earlier. You want to talk a little bit about the Coors, not Coors Field. Not Coors is not a sponsor yet. But we're talking about when the Yankees had their beloved Core Four, which was basically Posada, Jeter, Pettit, and Rivera. Which, by the way, I thought was really disrespectful to Bernie Williams. So to be left out of the core, because I felt in many ways, at least early on in the Yankees championship run, Bernie Williams was the MVP of that team. But I digress. That combination played on all those World Series winners, although Posada wasn't on the 96 roster. So I kind of, but fine. He did a nice job. But that was a core they had over a bunch of years, won several championships with them. At the beginning of the 2010s, you saw a tremendous core in San Francisco with Bumgarner and Lincecum and Posey and Sandoval and Matt Cain, and you had a bullpen that stayed together a tremendous amount of time. We had a bullpen with the likes of Romo and Santiago and Affeldt and Javier Lopez were all together there. Brian Wilson 1 year doing this, Marco Scutaro doing that. So you're taking a look at who are the teams right now that are building together a core. And you had kind of like a ranking of some of those. Yep. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on those.
Love power ranking stuff at the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. And we only did lineups too. So we looked at core four for your lineups because I believe to have like a real playoff lineup, you need 4 dudes in there who you trust. Of course, some lineups are deeper. You might have 6, 7 dudes, but I think you need at least 4 guys you can trust to go up there and produce at the plate. So I always think these power rankings are more fun when you start at the top and work your way backwards, do a little reverse pyramid. So, Sully, I'm going to throw out my power ranking to you, and then you could just kind of give me your thoughts on
Can I tell you what my top one would be?
Okay.
I wonder if it's the same as yours.
Okay, we could go back and forth here.
Because I think you've done more homework on this than me. Okay. So I'll just tell you my top one.
Let's see.
I have ideas for some of the, but to me, there is a clear top one, especially with their off season they had last year. And that's the defending champs. I would have the Astros at the top for me. Adding Abreu to the young star of Jeremy Pena, World Series and playoff hero Yordan Alvarez, Alex Bregman turns things around. Abreu is there with Altuve. If Brantley is at all healthy, I mean, I just think that this, the Kyle Tucker. I mean, Tucker would be a star on many teams, the star of many teams. And you take a look at this team, the lineup that they have, there's no rest for the weary, especially if you have a motivated Jose Abreu in the middle of this lineup. And I think it's important if you're trying to defend the title to add that kind of new piece to the puzzle to sort of give it a fun spark. I really think that the defending World Series champion Astros have the best lineup, the best core, and we're not even talking about the pitching staff, but they're developing, I think, one of the strongest rotations. And the fact that they've already have back-to-back pennants, a World Series title, and inevitably will win another pennant in the next few years, if not this year, I think they're the strongest core we have in all of baseball.
I don't hate that at all. The Astros are on my list, but they're not my number one. And it's because it's only because we had to limit it to 4 people. If it was the core 6, then I think the Astros are number one because they by far have the deepest lineup. And if they were the toughest team to just limit it to 4 people. I was like, the 4th person could be like 3 different options.
Well, that's why I think that's why I put them at the top. But okay,
that's fair. But if I'm just taking the top 4 from each team, then I think they're a little bit low on my list. But if I had to go 5 or 6, then the Astros are clearly the best lineup.
Fair enough.
So I don't hate it at all that you have them number one. But to me, I thought the clear number one core in all of baseball for the core 4 was the team in my division that just built it this season, the last couple of seasons.
The Rockies.
The Colorado Rockies with Chris Bryant. And unfortunately, they lost Brendan Rodgers for potentially the season. But I digress. It's actually the San Diego Padres, just because you're going to have Manny Machado, excuse me, he was top 5 in MVP voting last year. Tatis, who I think has already won the MVP in 2021 or 2022. Soto is going to win the MVP probably in one of these next few years. And then Bogarts, he's just your casual. He's going to be a 12-time All-Star when he retires in the Hall of Famer. So I just think that's the best core. Of course, the Astros core is a beast too, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. But I think just on paper, in terms of the peak ceiling of talent of your top 4 players, I think Padres are number 1.
I totally get that. I absolutely totally get that. And maybe I'm adding a little narrative to this, the fact that this core in Houston is also have the swagger of the defending champs. Yeah. I mean, think of the 2 teams that we mentioned, the Yankees of the 90s and 2000s and the San Francisco Giants of the 2010s. One of the things that made those cores so strong were the multiple titles that this group won. I'm not, even if we say, okay, we're going to Men in Black the 2017 championship and the 2019 pennant out of it. We're only focusing on the Dusty Baker years. They're already putting down the foundation for a dynasty of this decade. And so the fact that everyone I mentioned there, with the exception of Jose Abreu, has been a World Series hero so far. That was the only thing for pure star power. Yeah, I think that, this is one of the best collection of stars since we saw LeBron show up in Miami.
Okay, look, a little basketball reference.
That's all right. I'm not that dumb, but so that's the only reason I put the Astros a little bit ahead of San Diego. San Diego to me is a strong 2. And I think you can certainly make the case it's a 1. I think I could make the case that Houston's a 1. But I think that those are the 2 that are up there. I wonder if I have a number 3. I wonder if it's the same number 3 as you.
Well, I don't think I've told you my number 2 yet, but it is.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm sorry.
It is the Houston Astros.
I just assumed it was the Astros.
Yeah. It's just tough to figure out who you want to put in that 4th spot, because I have Jose Abreu written down as the 4th best player, but you could put Alex Bregman. You could put the rookie phenom, Jeremy Pena. Like, they're so deep at that number 4 spot. They have the deepest lineup in baseball. It's very tough to figure out a core 4 for them because they're so deep. But who's your number 3 team, Sully?
Well, see, my number 3 team is completely dependent on one of their top prospects. So I'm kind of cheating a little bit.
Okay.
But any team that has number 1 and 2 in the MVP vote with Goldschmidt and Arenado. And then you still have, Edmonds is a fine player. They brought in Wilson Contreras. You got good players if Jordan Walker can turn into the player that we think he can be, then those first 2 of the core are so good that you can fill in. Is it going to be Lars Nootbaar? It better be. They better have a candy bar named after him right away. Or Tyler O'Neill or Brendan Donovan. Or all these wonderful players they have on St. Lou. I just have a hard time ignoring which one of those 2 players should win the MVP. That to me is the foundation of that. And so I'm cheating a little bit there. And I put them slightly ahead of the team that probably should be number 3. But I just did that because I when you have 2 MVP candidates, you can lower the bar for the other 2 members of the core. Maybe I'm cheating there. I used too many for the Astros and too few for the Cardinals.
Yeah, the Cardinals, I had them down as an honorable mention. I wrote them down, but my problem is, listen, like you said, Arenado and Goldie, 1 and 2 in your MVP voting is elite for a core 4. But it's that 3-4 spot where I'm like, the talent there in that 3-4 spot, it's just not as much as these other teams in their 3-4 spot.
Fair enough.
That's why I just got them down as my honorable mention, because my number 3 team, Sully, is actually the team that was in the World Series and lost to the Houston Astros.
Okay.
And this one, you could guess, could be considered cheating too, because Bryce Harper is going to potentially miss half the season with like Tommy John surgery, right? But if he's healthy, he's in the core with the newly signed Trey Turner, who's also an MVP candidate. You got the home run leader, Kyle Schwarber, and then maybe the best offensive catcher in baseball, and JT Realmuto. I just love the versatility when you have those 4 guys. Bryce Harper could carry your team. Trey Turner's a speed monster. He's added power. Kyle Schwarber is just a straight up power monster. Then J. Real Muto is just doing work behind the plate. I like those 4 as my third best lineup in all of baseball. Do you have a fourth, Sully?
Well, by the way, I think that I honestly think that Harper missing the first half of the season is going to have a positive effect in a way. Not that you ever want to remove someone like Bryce Harper from your lineup, but I have a feeling that he's going to come back at full strength in the second half and be a boost to the team. And it's like, it will be like making a trade. So if they can stay within contention, for the first half of the season and then insert a Bryce Harper into the lineup, I think the Phillies are going to do fine this year. I like Toronto because I think a lot of players in Toronto had years last year that didn't quite match what we thought the back of their baseball card was going to be. But you still have Vladdy Guerrero, you still have Matt Chapman, you still have George Springer. Who's the last one going to be? Is it going to be Dalton Varsho?
Hell yeah, it's going to be Varsho.
You have and Alejandro Kirk is a good player on there. Could be Bo Bichette. I mean, you have a ton of players there with potential MVP talent, and they were only okay last year, and yet they still made the playoffs. They still hosted the wild card series despite being only okay. To the point where they had to fire the manager and they didn't really have that MVP that they thought they were going to have. If some of those players play closer to what we're expecting, then I think that's a phenomenal core.
You know what, Sully? I have them as my number 4 team as well. Maybe we'll be lock and step these last 2 spots because I still would have loved if they had Teoscar Hernandez in that lineup. I think he would have rounded out my top 4. I probably would have bumped Dalton Varsho for Teoscar Hernandez. But let's not undervalue Dalton Varsho, what he can do for the Blue Jays, because he's not only going to bring 25 home run potential and 25 stolen base potential. By the metrics, Dalton Varsho was like by far and away the best defensive outfielder in all of baseball last season. So to add that to that mix with Kevin Kiermaier, the Blue Jays outfield defensively is going to be stout. Vlad Guerrero Jr., I think, is going to have a huge season this year. Bo Bichette is going to have a huge season as well. And then I also had George Springer. If he can stay healthy, he was an all-star last season. Wasn't exactly the peak George Springer that we've seen in the past, but he's still someone that's not old at all, still in his early 30s. So I still think he's in his prime as well. So I'm going to have the Blue Jays as my number 4 core. I think they're going to make real noise in the American League. I think in the AL East too, it's going to be between them and the Yankees fighting for that division. And listen, they added Chris Bassett to that rotation as well this year. So the Blue Jays are in it to win it this season. But do you have a number 5 team, Sully, before I give you mine?
Well, it's funny that like you brought up the Yankees, who have the MVP and Judge.
Yeah.
And they have players like, you had a down year from DJ LeMahieu, who a few years ago was a legitimate all-star. And you had a strange season from Giancarlo Stanton. If Stanton and Judge are playing up to their caliber, then that's the second best 1-2 punch in baseball behind Goldschmidt and Arenado.
Ohtani Trout?
But okay, we came in. Ohtani Trout. We're talking not a drop. We're talking like a cliff.
Yeah,
you fall
to the
off
3-4.
A waterfall. The beginning of the Mission. Hey, anyone who got that reference? But I know that one was obscure for even me. I'll explain it later. Hashtag Sully Mission if any of you got that reference. But the Yankees can't rely on any of their other players other than Judge to be of an all-star caliber. Rizzo could, LeMahieu could, Stanton could, even Donaldson could. One of the young kids, I forget all the names of the young kids at shortstop.
Well, I was going to say, how about Gleyber Torres, the man who you would have thought? He would have been the core 4 guy if this was like a 2 year ago exercise.
And so it's funny, like there's all those players that I just rattled off could have really terrific seasons along with Judge. I just don't think anyone can count on that, which I think is one of the strange paradoxes with this Yankee team, whose pitching staff I actually like a lot.
I love it.
And I don't trust their lineup. Their lineup could score 8 runs, or we all saw they could get shut out. And so it's strange that you have a team with all the resources and that centerpiece. There you go. By the way, the Red Sox should have a core of Betts, Bogarts, Devers, and Benintendi. That should be, there's your core right there. But dare I dream, that's not going to happen.
Maybe GD at least.
Maybe GD. And Los Angeles, I mean, they have Betts, they have Freddie Freeman. Mm-hmm. They have, I'm still confused with why Trey Turner is no longer there. They don't have Gavin Lux anymore.
No.
That core really, I mean, they have a bunch of really talented young players who a couple of them could explode into superstardom this year, or maybe not. Atlanta has, I think, whatever version of Ronald Acuna Jr. and Matt Olson you get this year is a great foundation for a core. And I think people are still sleeping on Atlanta. I think they're a wonderful team. The Mets obviously have some tremendous players on their club as well. But yeah, I mean, the Yankees are the team that make me scratch my head the most, because they have a player who's just this monster, this Frankenstein monster in the middle of their lineup, and a bunch of people who could really be great. But look me in the eye and say, you're positive that they're going to be great. And you can't.
Yeah, and someone like Anthony Rizzo feels like he's like 36 years old, even though he's only 32 years old. Like, this is someone that should still be in the prime of his career. And he's coming off a solid season where he had 32 home runs, 800 plus OPS, but you still don't expect all-star level Anthony Rizzo anymore, even though he's still somewhat in the prime of his career. I think Gleyber Torres is probably the swing player in that lineup, because he's still someone that's like 27, 28 years old. He still hit 24 home runs last season. Like, he still has the upside to be a monster power guy in the middle of that lineup. And we saw him be like one of the most premier offensive shortstops in all of baseball back in 2019, 2020. And I don't know what has happened to that guy since then. So hopefully he can get back to that form. But you just mentioned a whole bunch of teams. Before I get to my number 5 team, let me give you some honorable mentions here, because you mentioned the Dodgers had Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Will Smith, and then it was kind of tough to figure out that number 4 spot in the Dodgers lineup. Like, would it be Max Muncy, who's coming off a bad season? Would it be JD Martinez, who's coming off a down season? Like, it's kind of tough to figure out who's the 4th best player in the Dodgers lineup. Chris Taylor, maybe, but he didn't have a great season either. Another honorable mention, we didn't mention the New York Mets. I thought they were probably the closest team I had to putting them down as the number 5 team, with the Pete Alonsos, Lindors, the Brendan Nimmo's, and the Starling Martes, a really, really good core for it. But the team that you just mentioned, I think, is my number 5 team when I look at all the core fours in baseball. The Atlanta Braves with Matt Olson, Austin Riley, Acuna, and Michael Harris, because Acuna and Austin Riley are good enough to do what the Cardinals did, where you can have 2 guys finish in the top 5 of MVP voting. And then they're my number 5 team because I really believe in their rookies last season. Michael Harris is one of those guys, and I think he could be in for just a monster season this year, where he has, 15 to 20 home runs and then 20 to 30 stolen bases and bats 850 OPS with 290 average and just plays stellar defense in the outfield. And I think he could be the swing piece in that team. And maybe you even get to a place where you're like, is Michael Harris better than Ronald Acuna? I don't know. That might be too blasphemous to say, but I think they're loaded with talent in that lineup. They're loaded in the rotation. I think the Braves are going to be in the mix for the World Series once again. I think they have the 5th best core for right now. And we know they added Sean Murphy, which I'm not as high on that move as other people are, but he's still a very good catcher. And that was a nice addition to that lineup.
I totally agree. I think about the core that could have been with Abreu leaving the White Sox. You could have had a core with Abreu, Tim Anderson, and if Luis Robert and Eloy Jimenez had reached that potential, or Moncada, all those players that we all thought were on the verge of superstardom, and it looked like they were having the top 2 right there. Anderson, Abreu was the big slugger in the middle of it. Anderson was the leader on the field. And if those 2 other players who both were not bad last year, but they never exploded into the players. And Moncada, we're like, how many years are we waiting for him to turn the corner?
Yeah.
You know, that's one of the things for my many friends who are White Sox fans. And check out Nick Morosky on Locked on White Sox. He has a great show there. And for the White Sox fans that I've been talking to over this year, that's the thing that makes them most frustrated about the fact that they didn't cut the cord with Tony La Russa fast enough, you know, because he clearly wasn't working. Mm-hmm. And they kind of looked at what happened with the Phillies, who fired their high-profile World Series winning manager early enough to turn the season around. Could this White Sox team that was still in contention going into the final month of the season, if things had been a little different, if those players had turned? And now, you know, Anderson's still there. Andrew Vaughn is still a fine player. You know, maybe Robert and Jimenez and Moncada can become an interesting core in the South Side. But when you lose that Jenga piece of Jose Abreu, that's just rough to deal with.
Yeah, I think everyone's off the White Sox bandwagon this year.
Oh, I am absolutely. But I'm, you know, but the thing, and the other thing that's so frustrating is that that's a winnable division.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, Cleveland won 90-something games last year and ran away with it in the final month, but they were only up by one game and going into Labor Day. And it's not like they're a low-budget team, and Minnesota finished with a losing record. You know, if the White Sox had their act together, they could be talking about, like, this would be like 4 straight trips to the postseason this year. And maybe this is the year where everything falls into place. Instead, they're going back in a rebuilding mode with a new manager and blah, 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 blah. And for White Sox fans, it's agony because they look like they're putting together something really terrific. And they wasted the Dylan Cease season that he had last year, because Dylan Cease had a phenomenal season for the White Sox last year. And that was just they were handed an ace season. They were handed a Cy Young contender, and it just didn't work. And, you know, I feel badly for White Sox fans because things were really looking up for them in the COVID year and when they won the division in 2021.
Yeah, and it wasn't even all on Tony La Russa. Like, no one thought he was a good
Enough of it was.
A lot of it was. But also, it's hard to win games if your best players just aren't on the field. Tim Anderson is perpetually hurt. Luis Robert, Eloy Jimenez were perpetually hurt. Lucas Giolito had, like, a pretty down season by his standards. Like, it was pretty much Dylan Cease, the only guy living up to expectations. Like, Jose Abreu was still a contact machine, but his power, like, fell off considerably last year. So it's like, it was a whole combination of things that led to really poor expectations for the White Sox.
The Braves won the World Series with an outfield they didn't have start going into July. You know, I mean, you could win. Every team has injuries. Every team has injuries. You know, there's always someone in the World Series sitting on the sideline going, "Oh, if only he was in." You know, I don't know. But do you know what? We're not riddled with injuries to the point where I'm going to say, "Hey, we did a good show today."
Oh, no WBC talk?
Well, do you want? Let's tease that for our next time, because we'll talk about the WBC. Maybe we'll have some stuff to talk about there. We both have some definite thoughts on that, and maybe we'll see a little who's gone further in there. And by the way, send me your tweets at Sully Baseball and let me know your thoughts about the WBC. Whether you're following it, whether you're really into it, whether it's a curiosity, whether you just can't wait for the regular season. I don't want this to be a WBC bashing podcast, but I also don't want it to be a WBC love fest. I want to know what you're all thinking about it. And send that to me at Sully Baseball, your thoughts, and Millard and I will talk about when we reconvene after this weekend. Hey, by the way, just a warning. For those of you who don't like when I bring up things that have nothing to do with baseball, when we get together on Monday, I am going to be talking a little bit about the Oscars. Okay. Pal Sully's obsessed with the Oscars, and there have been some very good movies this year, and a couple that made me scratch my head. I really, really, really hope Ke Huy Quan, a.k.a. the kid who plays Short Round, wins the Oscar, because he was great in Everything Everywhere All at Once. Yeah. And there were some very good movies this year. I don't think there's been a classic movie this year, but there have been some good movies. And sometimes that's all you want. But there's always been good podcasts when I'm here with Miller. And by the way, thanks so much for making Locked On MLB or Locked On Diamondbacks for that matter your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball. Win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring you the best fantasy draft strategy. Find Locked On Fantasy Baseball wherever you get your podcasts on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Miller Thomas, tell people where they can listen to your show.
You can follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for my personal account. Look up Locked On Diamondbacks on Twitter, Instagram for the podcast handle. And you could just listen to Locked On Diamondbacks wherever you stream podcasts. And we're on YouTube, Locked On Diamondbacks on there as well. And everything, everywhere, all at once. Better sweep the awards for the Oscars. That's all I'm saying.
I hope. I don't know if it's going to sweep it. I think it's going to win a couple of big ones. I hope Michelle Yeoh wins. No offense to Kate Blanchett, who's great, but she already has 2 Oscars. And I hope Kei Kwan wins, although there are some. Brendan Gleeson was great in The Banshees of Inisherin. There were some good performances here, too. I digress. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Breaking down the cores and look at the timer going down. We can't go over time here. This has been Locked On MLB, Locked On Diamondbacks crossover for the 8th day of March, 2023. He's Miller Thomas. I'm your pal Sully. Let's fist bump and win ourselves an Oscar.